Welcome back to Tech Tip Tuesday. Today we are going to talk about including extra resources in your pattern. And this is kind of a corollary to a video I've already done, which is talking about how to kind of link those digital resources. I'll link that here, but that's more the mechanics of how to accomplish it. This is more so like what you can include and why you might want to do that. So let's talk about these extra resources first of all. So this is some sort of link or QR code to a long form content. It has to be long form. We'll talk about that in a minute. That contains some sort of additional helpful information. So tutorials, inspiration, tips and tricks, right? Whatever happens to make sense for the pattern that you're doing. And I'll give you some examples of this in a little bit. But the reason I really like to do this, and almost all of the quilt patterns that I've published have embedded blog posts with them that kind of direct the reader to these additional helpful tips. They're kind of like expanded resources for the quilt pattern. Yes, they're specific to the quilt pattern, but they're also kind of more broadly useful to the quilting community as well. They're just kind of additional quilting basics that you have information about that you kind of direct the reader to. And so it's really nice to include these things because it helps you balance between kind of too much information and not enough information, which is something that I see a lot of newer quilt pattern designers struggling with. A lot of people come into quilt pattern writing having been the beginner that was just like overwhelmed by all of these patterns that didn't have enough information in them. And so they overcompensate for that by just including everything they can possibly think of that might be helpful in the quilt pattern. Sometimes it's helpful, but more often than not, it's just too much. It's overwhelming for your reader, especially if this is not their first quilt and they don't need all of this kind of painstaking detail on all of these tips and tricks, on all of these techniques. And so you can still have that information available to them. That's really helpful for beginner quilters, but by just kind of directing people to it and linking it rather than including it in the actual quilt pattern is a really helpful way to kind of still get at that information in there without overwhelming your reader. Again, this is a very delicate balance and it takes some time to just kind of figure out what works for you. But if your pattern is like 20 or 30 pages long and it's just a basic block-based pattern, that's too much. You've got way too much detail in there. You don't need that much detail in your pattern. Pull some of it out, put it into a blog post, put it into a YouTube video, whatever makes sense for your business, and just kind of direct your readers there if they're interested rather than force feeding it to them in your pattern. The other reason these are really helpful is because it can drive more traffic to your website. That helps with search engine optimization and just kind of visibility for your business as well. You're selling somebody a quilt pattern, and when they click on that link, your website gets a hit, and so you'll start to rank higher just in Google as a result of that. And so this is a really helpful way to drive some traffic to your website in addition to kind of managing that balance of overwhelm, not enough and too much, which is really the primary purpose of this. It's also the opportunity to kind of spawn some stickier content for your website, right? Most of us in the quilt pattern industry are doing content marketing. We put free content out there in the hopes that we attract our people and then can kind of develop a relationship with them and they'll eventually buy from us. That's why we do blogs. That's why we do Instagram. That's why we do YouTube, like whatever happens to be, right? That's marketing. And so if there are kind of additional tips and tricks that you're using in your quilt pattern that you can make this extra resource for, first and foremost geared towards the person who bought your pattern, but is also helpful to just kind of generally quilters on the internet, especially if it's things that are getting Googled and getting kind of search engine hits anyways. It's the opportunity to kind of generate that content that also helps with your marketing. You don't have to do these things as like two completely separate things. And that's really good because I don't know about you, but like making enough content to stay at the top of search results is exhausting. You have to generally make a lot. It is very noisy out there on the internet. And so any opportunity to kind of dual purpose these things and get more bang for your buck is really great. So how do you include these extra resources in your pattern? Well, like I said, if it's a digital pattern, the easiest way to do that is to just embed or hyperlink to whatever the resource is. So if that's your blog post or your YouTube video, right, just embed it as a hyperlink. They can click, it'll take them to the website. They can see everything that's there and get the additional help that they're looking for. But you can also do it as a QR code or something along those lines if it's a print pattern. And I will link to that video here that talks all about how to kind of accomplish this and why you might want to do it for paper patterns. But the kind of overarching theme here is that the thing that you're linking to has to be long form content. So we're not talking about an Instagram reel here or a TikTok that's 30 seconds long. This has to be something a little bit longer, a little bit meatier that they can really get into and learn something from. And you also want it to be timeless, right? You want it to be something that is universally relevant, no matter how long it's been since you wrote the thing, to whoever stumbles across your website on the internet, because this is also a form of marketing content as well. So blog posts are really great. If you don't have a blog, you don't have to be a blogger. You don't have to write every day or even every week or even every month if you don't want to, but just having a blog that houses some of these extended resources that are helpful to quilters in general can really boost your website in the search rankings. The third thing I really want you to keep in mind here is that you want to figure out a way to make this content sticky. Again, we're not putting this behind a paywall. This is not pattern specific information. These are just general tutorials that are relevant to the pattern that you have. And so you're going to kind of add them as an extended resource to that pattern, but also make it available to everyone. So all of those other people that are not coming to your website from the pattern, you want to have some way to kind of further engage those people. So including kind of a link to your freebie, or, hey, do you want this pattern download or a free pattern or something like that? Something to grab their attention and capture an email is also a really good thing to include on this log form content. So if it's a blog post, at the end, include a little blurb about, hey, if you found this helpful, here's something else you might find helpful. It's a link to a download. Here's this pattern terms freebie that you might find helpful. Put it in your email and I'll send it to you, right? Something to make that content a little bit sticky so that people that discover you through this content that's helpful to them continue a relationship with you so that they can eventually purchase from you if it's the right fit, right? If they like your stuff, you're looking for your people. That's the whole purpose of marketing. If it's a YouTube tutorial, you can do the same thing. Just put it in the descriptions. It's super, super easy. You won't get super high conversions here more than likely, but you also don't want to just miss that opportunity completely if someone is very interested in what you happen to have. All right, so let's talk some examples of these extra resources that you might include. Binding tutorials, right? At the end, we've kind of got abbreviated finish instructions, and it says something like, layer your quilt, baste it, however you desire, quilt it, however you desire, bind it, however you desire, right? With the appropriate number of binding strips. All of those steps, we are assuming that people already know how to do these things. Most of the time that's true. Even when it is true, some people are always looking to learn new things, right? They don't love the way that they baste a quilt. They're looking for something better. It's usually a pain in the butt. And so if you've got a way that you really love, just put it into a tutorial. Take a few pictures and write up a blog post on it and direct them there in this section of your pattern. That's a really helpful value add thing to your pattern that doesn't just kind of leave them hanging with whatever they know already. Again, beginner quilters generally know one way to do this, and that's it. And there's always more than one way. So this is a great opportunity to share the ways and techniques that you have found over the years and really love. Choosing a color palette. If you've got a quilt pattern that's like an ombre or something like that, that's something I've done with my own quilt patterns, kind of including a tutorial on how to pool those colors so you get that really beautiful gradient. A little bit of color theory for quilters. That's a really good way to add some value. If you're sewing curved pieces, write a tutorial on how to sew curves. If it's a beginner pattern, rather than writing out all of the steps and showing all of the diagrams for trimming HSTs, which is just like a bit much for more advanced quilters, you can include that as an extended resource. And if you need it, it's here kind of thing, rather than taking up space in your pattern. Quilting inspiration, right? How many people get stumped when they're trying to figure out how to quilt the dang thing after it's made? That's a really great one. So if you've got some good ideas for how to do this, just write it up in a quick blog post. It maybe takes you an hour to write the darn thing, and it can be a really, really helpful thing in your quilt pattern, and then also a form of sticky content to kind of attract new leads. Alternate colorways, another really great way to do this. I've also seen people do it with like tester parades, right? They'll put that up on their blog. It gives your testers a little bit more exposure, which is a nice way to thank them, but also helps give a ton of inspiration for people that are trying to make the quilt. So a blog post on that and linking that to your pattern can really be helpful. These are just some of the many ways that you can do it. It's really sky's the limit here, but anything that you're interested in or that you feel like you've got a ton of information on that you don't necessarily want to put in the quilt pattern, stick it into a blog post, link it into your pattern. It's a really great way to add more value. Alrighty, I hope you found that helpful. If you did, make sure you like and subscribe, and I will see you next week for Tech Tip Tuesday.